I think. Ah, yeah, now we are.
Now we are. Okay, so can everybody see my screen? Okay, perfect. I'm not sure like how many of you, or maybe first of all, I tend to speak very fast when I give presentations. And also maybe if I'm moving too fast in general, please feel free to interrupt or ask questions at any time. Since I will just basically go through the points that I mentioned in the quick overview that I sent around, because I think these are the most important things to get started. So first of all, like, I don't know how many of you already requested an account and maybe already received an account. If you have an account, this is how the starting page of Lioness looks like. That's what you arrive at when you log in. You start with a general folder here. For me, that's empty now because all my experiments that I did, I created new folders for, but I will touch up on this later. If you want to start with an experiment, you just basically click on New Experiment at the top left here. And you give it a name. Let's well, maybe test 2, because I think I already saved the test 1. You can select here if you want to make it public already or private. Let's say we want to have it private for now, so other people can't find it in the repository. I will also come back to that later. And then you just click on save, and then you arrive on the first stage of your experiment that you're about to make. The stage always starts or gives you already 3 elements. It's always a JavaScript element, a text box, and a button to move to the next stage, because I think these are the most used elements that you will have. What I will do now is I basically create an experiment with all elements, so you see what elements options are there. You do this here by adding a new element. So we already have a JavaScript box, we already have a text box, we already have a button. So I will continue with a numeric input, and basically once you click on it, you can then decide like where you want to insert it on the stage. You will later see that basically a stage is always made up in the sequence that you, or like the stage will consist of the elements that you put on the stage in the order that you put the elements on that stage. So the first element on that stage is now our text box, because like a JavaScript element you don't see, it's the program that runs in the background. So I will now insert the numeric input after the text box. I call it numeric. That's the text that's being displayed, and also the variable name. I will make it numeric. And I have to assign a minimum and a maximum value. Then I do this for the radio line as well. I'll call it again radio, so we can see it. We have a minimum of 1, and let's put 11. Then we have a slider as well. Yes, and all elements, basically, I think it's rather straightforward. I have different options. Usually you always have to assign, I think most importantly, a variable name, because the input, that's the variable under which the input will then be recorded. So now I go on with the discrete choice. Here you can assign different options. You can, it always starts with 2, but you can also make this 3, for example. And we also have the element reference. This is a new feature. I haven't really used this yet. I think this is to basically copy an experiment across stages. But I think the new version of the documentation touches up on this in a bit more detail. So let me just finish this quickly. Text, and then the text here. yeah, I think this is for now. I give it a name as well. Let's call it just stage 1. What I will do, what you can see now is that you can deselect here what size these elements should have. Basically, now each element takes up the full range of the screen, and each following element is following after the element, the previous element. So like under that element on that screen. You can change this to half or to third. I will do this by like doing this on a different stage. So what I will do is I create a new stage, and I will copy this stage by using this icon here. And now I can move along the stages, and actually I didn't have to create a new stage, and now I can use, similar as on the stage, this button to insert that stage. That's also called stage 1 now. I will call it stage 3 now. Stage 4 actually I don't need, so I delete it with this little button here. And what I will do now is I will, maybe let me put text here as well. I will make them all third sizes so I can fit as many boxes on the screen as possible, or many elements on the screen as possible next to each other. And also there is another button, another element that's also new. I haven't used this before, but I saw this in the latest update of the documentation, which is a chat, which enables participants to chat. Let's put this here. And also a back button, which didn't make sense on the very first stage, because you can't really go back to anything. So I made everything third size. I make the chat full size, and then I make the button and the continue button half size, so they're next to each other. I entered the chat. I didn't enter the chat in the first stage either, because what I will do now is, at the moment, we only have one participant in our experiment. But I think the main feature of Lioness is to be able to create interactive experiments where you have online participants interacting with each other in real time. And you do that by going to the parameters tab. So here you can enter the total amount of players. Usually when you upload an experiment, you set this very high because you don't know in the end like how many people maybe you also have to like kick out. So you really want, like, this is basically the whole, the maximum number of people that can take part in your experiment. Most importantly though is the group size, so like how many people you want to match with each other, who are supposed to play with each other in one experiment or in one session. So I will set this to 2 now, so you can see like the interaction between like 2 experiments. And then with number of periods, this is when you create loops. I will touch on this on like a ready-made experiment with a bit more functionality after I showed you just the basic stage setup. So I now set the group size to 2, and then I will go back to my experiment. And now, as on stage 2, I will set that stage to a lobby. So you have 3 different types of stages. Usually you work with a standard stage. That's also what I did here with my 2 stages. Then you have a quiz. This is where you can then test people and ask them comprehension questions. And if they fail after a certain amount of tries, they will be kicked out. Again, I will touch up on this later in the experiment that I prepared. But now we need the lobby, because this is the stage where people will be matched with each other. And this stage also automatically, like you don't really have to define anything on that stage. You can, but usually don't do. You get an automatic message that people should wait until they are matched. And you can set a timer here. If you don't set this timer, which I will not do now, people can decide for themselves to be rematched or like to wait a bit longer or leave the experiment. But you'll see this now. So basically, I set everything up now to start. And if you want to try out the experiment, you go on compile and test. You press compile the experiment, and then you land in the control panel where you can switch on and off the experiment by clicking this button. Usually you keep it always active. And you can put the test mode on and off. If you have the test mode on, then participants can enter multiple times. Usually when you run an experiment, you want to switch the test mode off, so people can't re-enter the experiment if they already have entered it. And this is the link that you can then share with experiment with participants, for example on mTurk, if you have uploaded the experiment. Again, I will touch up on this later though. So now I want to start. So I start a test play. I create a test player, and now you can see how the elements look on the screen. The layout at the moment is very simple because I basically just put them after each other. We have here our numeric input. The text field is actually above, but I forgot to write something into it on the first stage. This is the radio line. This is the slider. You can also put values left and right to that on that element. I think this is, yeah, you can see this here. Label the left, label right. This goes for both the radio line and the slider. Here we have our discrete option. Here I can enter text. And yeah, here I can enter a number. So when I try to enter letters here, and I want to click continue, then I also get a warning message that I need to enter a numeric input. Also, if I exceed the maximum, I get a warning, and only if I'm within the requirements, I can continue. And now, yeah, I'm in the lobby. I want to wait a bit longer because I didn't specify waiting time. So I just want to wait a bit longer. And now I create another test player. And yes, I need to enter my numbers and also some text, which is a number. I think it doesn't differentiate between text and numbers in the text field. Yeah.
Regarding the sizes of the fields you showed before, it says a third. And
so we were on the first stage now, where I had full pages. Now I matched the two players. So these will be matched, and now we move on to the next stage where I put
here it's
the third sizes. So yeah, now also like I have the text field here where I put text. I forgot to type text in the first stage, and now you can see. So like when you put third, then always 3 elements will be moved next to each other. There's one thing. Technically, the slider is a separate element. I am not entirely sure why it is also basically put under the radio line on that level. I was actually expecting it. So like now we have an empty field here, and I was actually expecting it to, well, be here, and then the discrete choice to be in the middle, and then the text field to be on the right. So I'm not entirely sure why this is the case for the radio line. But when I move to the experiment that I prepared, you will see I will show you like some tricks how I use text boxes basically to play around with the layout of the page a bit, because you can use like the breaking tag, for example, or paragraph tags in the text box to basically just create spaces. But you will see this later in the when I move to the prepared experiment. So yeah, the new feature I think was very cool. So like if I type hello one here and send this, then the other person should also see that I'm typing hello. This is a new feature. Like I think this really was just like added recently. I haven't used this before, which yeah, I think is really cool to also enable communication between the participants. Yes, and now this is for the back and the continue button. I created them in half sizes. So now you have like two elements next to each other, and you could technically go back, but I think you will just automatically be rematched since there's on like the players already have been matched. So yeah, that's just an overview over like how these elements, different elements look like in Lioness and how you set them up on the stage. I'll just go quickly back to the experiment and to the elements.
David, maybe one thing.
Yeah.
So, should be useful. Maybe sometimes we talk a little bit away from the microphone, so then we can't hear so much. So
okay, then I'll just keep that in my hand. Is that better?
Yeah, maybe a little bit further away from your mouth. But,
okay.
Yeah.
And let's try it like this. Okay. Yeah. So for each experiment, for each element, you can move them along the stage also using these arrows here. So if I click on the JavaScript element now, I basically move it one slot lower on the stage. You can cut them out or delete them using these buttons. And most of the elements where there's an input, you can click on required, and then you can only move to that stage if people have entered something in there. And you can also specify a correct value. So people can only move further if they enter the correct value. This becomes interesting then for the quiz stage, which I show you in a bit. Maybe one more thing about the parameters. Although no, I will talk about them in the experiment that I prepared. But yeah, so if I want to go back now to the starting page of Lioness, I click on this button here in the top right, and then I end in my general folder again. And now, yeah, I can, if I click here on the settings, I can rename my experiment. I can also make it public if I would like to. I can also add more comments and keywords or an alternative title. And I can also move it to a folder that I have created. So I created a folder intro session here. So usually I would think of the general folder maybe as like your desktop, so where you have like working projects on. But then if you finish something, you can just drag and drop them into a folder. And then you can just open these folders. You create a folder by clicking up here. Unfortunately, my screen is a bit buggy, or Google Chrome at the moment, so I have like this thing still in here. But yeah, there's this tab says new folder, and then you can just like create. You should be able to create in. Oh, sorry. Yeah, I did two now. So you create a new folder, and then you just click on it, and then you give it a name. New 2, and then yeah, you have a new folder. You can also delete them by just clicking that box. I'll also delete this one. So basically, that's just your basic environment. Also, if you want to look up experiments that have already been created and maybe use them as a template, you can go to the repository. And then you can look for them either by title, if you know the title, or by language, or by whom they have been created, or when they have been edited, or from which institution they have been created. So maybe let's look for experiments that have been created by me. Yeah, so yeah, there's quite a big, I still have a lot of public experiments because I have been sending them back and forth between people. And then you can just, yeah, sorry.
So sorry, is like, do we decide once we create an experiment if we want to make it public or not? And and people like, then we can use the experiments of others?
Exactly. So let me go back to the overview. So in that test example that I just created, at the very beginning, when you create the experiment, you can set the availability to either private or public. If you set it to private, nobody but you can find this, and it's only shown to you, and you can only find it in your folders in your stored experiments. If you put it public, it will be available in the repository. And
if, for example, you want to make it like we are 2 or 3 colleagues working on the same experiment, does it have to be public, or is there a way to, you know, just share with specific people? Like if we are in an ongoing process of creating an experiment and we're doing it collectively, can you?
Yeah, I don't think you can make it available to specific people.
Okay.
You can either only make it available to everybody or to one person. Also, it is not possible to work on one experiment at the same time. So when you go to the repository, and maybe I'm just going to take the beast experiment here. You click on that add button, and then this will be added to your general folder. And then this is basically the original that you now copied from the repository into your general folder. You can only view this in that point. You can't change anything. However, if you go back to your general folder, what you can do is you can create a copy of that experiment. Maybe set this to private again. Create a copy, and then you have a copy, which is also always named copy, in your general folder, and that you can then edit, and then you can work with it. So whenever you use an experiment from somebody else, you first have to copy it into your folder, copy it again to make it editable, and then you can edit and work with it, and then you can make it available on the repository again if you need to. And then other people can download it, but they can only edit it for themselves within their environment. Yes. All right. Then I would move on.
I mean, I think is actually also a really nice feature, actually, because if you create an experiment, then you actually make it immediately available for other people to also use it. So I think this is actually very nice that that you actually get like a repository of studies rather than people doing this all by themselves. So I think this is a very nice feature. And of course, it doesn't have the full-fledged capacity of like a GitHub where you can really collectively work on the same thing. So you have to do some workarounds sometimes. But all in all, I think this is a really cool environment for developing studies, and then also making sure that that you're spreading them.
Yes, I agree. And also, I think Lucas or like the Lioness team, they also prepared some ready-made experiments here on the left. Like it also says ready-made experiments and methods that I think they deemed useful, and I think they're also constantly trying to update this and kind of showcase functionality that is that they seem useful or think is useful for also other experiments.
David, just another quick question. So I think the feature is really great that you can like publicly share your experiment and find others' experiments. Now you showed like the overview, and I think there were like 109 different pages with public experiments. So I was wondering if there's like any search function by which you can like search for experiments that fulfill certain characteristics that you'd be interested in. Is there any such feature in Lioness?
Yes, so you can use, I think if there is keywords, let me try it. Yeah, so if you have keywords or like in the title, you can basically use a basic search function where you can look for, with keywords for experiments. And now, well, I just simply typed public goods. you still have a lot of entries for public goods games, because a lot of people use public goods games. I think this is also the example that is being used in the documentation. So that would be one function. Well, yeah, use prisoner, for example. That would be one option to narrow down. Generally, I would suggest, though, like if you have a specific problem or you're stuck and you would like insights, use the forum. I actually didn't know this forum exists for like quite a while already working with Lioness. I also included the link in that PDF that I sent around at the very top. It's a Google forum, so you just enter it with your email. That's registered to Google, and you can post your problem there. And Lucas and Marcus, the two head programmers of Lioness, are usually very quick to respond, and they either provide a solution to you straight away or a suggestion. Most of the time, they will point you to a previously created experiment, though, that tackled a similar problem, though. I think so. Like if with a quick search you can't really find what you need, I would just move to the forum, make a post, and usually in a day or two, often quicker, you get a response, and you'll point it to something that helps you. Yes.
David, one of the problems I've seen here is that, also when doing some things myself, is that you tend to get like different versions of the same thing that all end up in this repository. Have you also experienced this or not?
What do you mean with the different version?
that you create many different versions of the same experiment, that all actually end up in public repositories. So it comes.
So, like for example, you're talking specifically about experiments by me.
No.
Okay, no, because like
No,
for me, for example, so for me, like I have like a lot of experiments that are public. So obviously, I think generally it's a good practice, the experiments that you don't need, and that you're not working with anymore, and that you also don't think are maybe of added or don't add value maybe to the Lioness community, you should make them private or delete them, because obviously, I mean, I think this might also be one of the reasons why there's so many experiments in the repository, because yes, I mean, also mea culpa, like it's like you forget to like delete all of them, or you stack them up, because like the way I usually did experiments or created experiments, obviously I worked on an experiment, and then when I wanted to continue to work on it, I made a copy of it and then built up on that copy and then gave it a new name with a new date. But then like all the previous versions of the experiment still existed. So yes, obviously it definitely makes sense from time to time to clean up your folders, and maybe also if you don't want to delete some of them, switch off the public modus, the public visibility of them.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Thanks.
All right. So now, are there any more questions at this point? No. Then I would move on to an experiment that's maybe a bit more elaborate, or it's very simple, but has quite some, like, that uses the functionality of Lioness a bit more than I just did in this very quick example to give an overview of the elements. So that is the intro example that I prepared here. And I think first of all, what I want to put your focus on is like maybe three functions that I think are very important, which is the record function. You can also see this on the starting page, with which you create a new variable in the database that you want to work with. Similar to set value function and the get value function. I will go over them when I walk you through these stages. So I start this experiment with a very simple welcome page. So if you have the text box, you just can double click into it, Then you get the text shown, and you basically have a text editor. You can use this and just type text here, and also use like these features like you know them from Word, and then Linus automatically like transfers this into HTML code. I personally, once I got to know HTML a bit better, I used the function to write directly in HTML because I think it offered more control over the text that you're typing. So yes, I basically start with like a breaking tags to just like move it a bit from the top of the page, and make a headline and a normal paragraph, just indicating people to how to move on. You can close this again, and then you just have the simple text field. So yeah, and entering it is just by double clicking, and then if you want to go into HTML, use the text sign here. Then I use the JavaScript program here to record two variables that I will need, and I assign a value to them that makes, like, in case something goes wrong, I like recognize this value again easily, or like a value that doesn't really make sense for the variables that I'm using. And I labeled this my welcome stage. Then I created a second stage in which I only included the instructions. What I did here is I used this feature of basically writing your text, like the text editor feature here. So I didn't write this in plain HTML code. I basically just wrote this down in this field here, and then also bolded it, just to show you how this then looks in the HTML code. So it's a bit, yeah, you have a bit more paragraphing and bolding here. And it's all in one row. I personally felt like, I think it's very easy, and I guess for like most applications, it's totally fine to just simply write your text here that you need. It makes it very easy. But I think as soon as you have maybe a bit more feeling for HTML code, I found it easier to, yeah, just write it in plain HTML code myself, but then also structure the code in such a way that like I have a bit more orientation over orientation in it. So yeah, in my experiment, basically what I'm doing is like I will show color vision test plates to people, and they have to detect the right number, detect the right number or give the right number. If they're correct, they earn 10 points. They play together with the partner, and if the partner is wrong, their points are getting doubled. And if they are wrong, they get 0 points, and at the end, for each point, they get 1 cent. So very simple instructions. And then as the next stage, I created a quiz stage. So also I used quiz here. And what the quiz stage type does, basically, you can specify attempts, like an amount of attempts that participants have here. What it does, it counts the attempts or the times that people try to move to the next stage without having given the correct answer, which I also specified for each discrete choice option I specified here. And yeah, in case they they fail to give the correct answer within the number of attempts, they will be kicked out of the experiment, basically. Just make sure that people understood the experiment. And maybe what you can see here, I basically, before the continue button, I entered a text box just using a break tag. And that's basically just for layout reasons, so that I have a gap between my my last choice option and the continue button, because usually it's always a bit squished, and I think it looks a bit more aesthetic if you do that. So I think that's already like the first way, or yeah, how you can use, or like that's a major way how to use text boxes as a layout feature. After people have continued the test, they will enter the lobby. Here again, they are matched. Here now I also specified that they have 2 minutes to be matched before they are being asked if they want to wait for 2 more minutes. And then they enter the task page. And what I did here at the very beginning is I created an element in the paragraph and I gave it an ID so I can access it with Java code, which happens in the next element. And in that first element, which has the ID trial, I basically update at every trial, like the trial number, or like, yeah, a text like that updates like in which trial the participant is. And I can access the period variable, which is automatically generated by Lioness, yeah, using just period and plus signs within a string to, yeah, enter this into the text. Similarly, after creating a header that is asking people the question of which number is hidden in the circle, I created another element with the ID pick. And in that element, I'm actually showing the pictures to them. And I show them by first creating an array, assigning the image URL to a value, and then putting this into an array, and then accessing this array for each period. Since JavaScript is a index 0 based number, you always have to go -1 because you access the first element in the array with 0. Maybe as a quick excursion, so these image URLs, they stem from just an online image database that I used. I think I copied this from Marta, who also used Lioness before, and that image database is called imgbb.com. You can just create a profile there, and then you can create albums. And yeah, I mean, this is the album that I used. And then,
sorry, David, do you not upload the images on Lioness directly? You do this database that that's
yes.
the way you hold the images. They always have to be online somewhere, and you redirect to them rather than like within like a folder experiment, the way we do with GSPsych and JavaScript and this kind of.
Yes. So you import these images. You import these images via this links. What you can do is, once you downloaded your experiment, you can obviously put a folder with the images onto the server, your own server, and then access them from there via a link that you create yourself. But I think this was the easiest now for how I was working with Lioness.
Okay, you mean the server we're using to experiment online, like to, okay.
Exactly. I mean,
I don't know if you'll have time to get into that, but I was also wondering about all these things like, but this is later probably, how to link to the server and how to save the data and this kind of stuff.
I will try to try to touch up on this at the end. Yes.
Okay.
But
thanks.
yeah, I won't go into depth with this because I probably can talk for like 2 hours just how to create a server on Google Drive and upload this. But I will definitely touch up on this later. For now, since I'm also not a web development expert, I don't think you can like upload your own pictures directly, but you always have to make like a reference via a link to import these images into Lioness and then use them. So yeah, that's what I did here. And then maybe a feature that I haven't touched up on yet, and this is also to maybe just like show you difference then when I go into the experiment, how you can again change the layout of your page by using a combination of text boxes and yeah, the size of these elements. In the first, you can, for each element, or most elements, I think except JavaScript programs, you can select with these classes when the element, like a conditional, when these elements have to be, when these elements are shown. So either maybe if a counter reached a certain number, now I'm basically just doing this for a period. So like in the first period, I want my text field, my text input to be in full size, and also my continue button at the bottom in full size in period 1. And in every stage after the first stage, I enter a text field with a break element, and I put a third size, and I make the text field as well as the continue button third size as well, and I enter a break, a text field with a break tag in third size also after the continue button and my text field to make it smaller. You will see this then in the experiment, how this just changes the layout. Yes, then I provide feedback to participants and also use JavaScript code to generate or calculate the amount of points and save the amount of points. So what I'll do in the task for the text input, I call this a variable where people input the answer, just answer, and I can access this by using the getValue function. There's a simple version of it. I think I also mentioned this in the overview. The documentation gives a description of these functions in more detail. But yeah, the getValue function always accesses the value of the current player in the current period. So the simple version where you just enter this, you basically only have to enter the value of the variable in the current version, in the current period that you want to access. But this is the equivalent of the long version of this function, where the first argument specifies the table of the database that you want to access. I will also touch up on this after I went through the experiment. The player number, and at the end the variable that you want to access, or the player number and the period. You can see this in a bit more detail now when I select the answer of the team partner to see if I get double points or just the normal amount of points, where I use the long version, and I access the variable in the decisions table because that's where the variable is. Then I want to access it from the same group. So the group number is the same as my group number and from the same period. But the subject number is, I wanted 2 given that my subject number is 1. So if my subject number is 1, then I obviously want it from the other subject, and the subject number needs to be 2, and then the answer. And I do the opposite in any other case because I only have a group of 2. So in case my subject number is 2, I want it from subject number 1. Yes, and again, I created an array with the correct answers. With the correct answers, I see if I select my correct answer for this period, and then I basically match. I check if my own answer is the same as the correct answer, as well as if my partner gives the correct answer, then I get 10 points. If my partner answered incorrectly, I get the double amount of points, and otherwise, if I'm wrong, I get 0 points. And I always also then use setValue, which is the function to save in value to a variable, where I now count the correct answers. And in any case where I'm correct, I assign it a 1 or a 0. And at the end, I also save the number of points. And at the end, I sum everything together, the amount of points as well as the amount of correct answers. And at the end, set the bonus by using set bonus to the product of my total points and the exchange rate, which brings me to the parameters now that I use here. Because what you can do, as I did before, you set the group size here, but I also select the amount of periods. That is like how many rounds I want players to play. You saw this maybe earlier, that I have an arrow above stage 5 and stage 6. So what happens here is basically in the first 3 times, or like for the amount of times that I specified the periods, people when entering stage 6 and they click continue, they will move back to stage 5 and basically enter the new round of the experiment. And this I specify here by my number of periods and where I want the loop to start and the loop to end. You can also create the loop like over one stage. It doesn't have to be like more. It doesn't have to encapsulate more than one stage. You can also just do this on one single stage, and then it always loops over the same stage.
Sorry, yeah, I wanted to ask you, so exactly that. So for example, if it's a more complex task that is, you know, that several things within a trial that, and we have a code that we have already on JavaScript or something like that, it's possible to integrate it into a JavaScript code in one stage and just loop over. Is that the kind of things like that are easy to implement?
I mean, I'm not entirely sure. Like I would say yes now to your questions. Like obviously, I'm not entirely sure what you mean. I mean, there's a huge, like sometimes like these pre-programmed features obviously put boundaries, and then you need to like kind of customize your code and the page setup somewhat, which is possible. But yes, you can. Like if you have code that is only like run an experiment on one page. And you want to repeat this, you can just basically create that loop. So instead, maybe of like looping over stage 5 and 6, you can only loop over stage 5. And then it's always the code in that stage being executed over like the amount of periods that you specify.
Okay, so I guess, for example, if it was on several pages, then we would just need to have several on several pages, yeah, like not on the same page, then we would have several stages and we do the loop as you did here, right?
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So like if you have several if you have an experiment, or you have a code or set up an experiment where one period or like one trial goes over several stages, then you loop over this amount of stages. Then you can specify.
David, related question. Can you have several loops? Like if I would have, for example, 20 practice rounds at the beginning and then 50 actual rounds, interacting rounds later, would it be possible to have, like several loops at the beginning and loops at the end?
I would say yes, but that's not that easy. So like you can't do this with the pre-programmed features. So like when I programmed the experiment, our experiment for the timing effect of social influence, I actually didn't use the pre-programmed feature to create the loops, but I basically just reloaded the page itself. But yeah, I got help from Lucas and who were more elaborate or versatile in JavaScript code to do that. So the possibility to enter JavaScript code gives you a lot of customizability. But if you rely mostly on the pre-programmed features, I would answer no to your question. So like if you would ask me like, can you do several loops in one experiment, I would say no when you rely on the pre-programmed features. But in theory, it's possible to do that. But then you just have to hard code it yourself.
Yeah.
So maybe to finish with the explanation of the experiment and the parameters. The remaining parameters that you can see here are the participation fee. Basically, that's just what you said as what people get as a fixed amount when they finish the experiment, and the exchange rate, if you want to, like in our case now, so like people get points and you want to specify like how much each point is worth, you can use this to translate your points into real money. I don't know the pop-up feature. This is also new to me. And the dropout handling is specifies what happens if people drop out. So if their internet connection crashes or so. And you have three options. It's either terminate the group or proceed with the reduce group, which I think is obviously the best default. Or disable exclusion, which is the option that you would choose if you would run the experiment in a laboratory. So you can obviously also program an experiment and let it run in the lab. And then dropouts are rather unlikely, because if something happens, you can try to fix them on site. So you would choose this option either if you're running the experiment in the lab, or if you have an experiment where you only have one participant and you don't have a group. And maybe as a last thing, because I think I forgot to mention this, at the end, what I'm doing is I'm providing a text to participants in which I show them their total amount of correct answers they gave by selecting a variable that I previously specified in my JavaScript element with the $2 signs. So you can enter a variable or display a variable, a JavaScript variable in a text field by using $2 signs. And I do this for the amount of total answers, the total amount of correct answers, and as well as for the amount of points. And also at the end, I provide a random ID, which is also a pre-programmed variable that you always get for each participant, that they can then enter in mTurk or Prolific, wherever you use this, and then you can use this to assign the correct amount of points to them. So let me just quickly show you how this looks like. So here we have our instructions. I click continue. And now, for example, if I click run option wrong, I get the message that I'm wrong, and also it updates the amounts of attempts that I still have left to continue. So now I continue, I end up in the lobby, and I have to wait for the next participant. Again, I clicked wrong. And then I immediately enter my experiment. And then, I provide feedback to them. And then after the feedback page, people, the loop starts, people end up again in the experiment. And now you can see that with the text boxes and where I included the break statements and setting the text input and the choice button to a third size, I made this a bit smaller. And again, I changed the layout a bit. Because these long buttons sometimes I find a bit irritating. And now let's have one person be wrong.
So, sorry. So, just one thing. So now the way it's done is somehow like they're doing the experiment in parallel, and of course there is the chat option and this kind of things. But I was wondering, like, is it easy also to include in the way you code it, like to get, instead of getting your partner answered at the feedback time, I don't know, something interactive? I guess like a pop, like, you know, I don't know if it's common they do that. I don't know if
Sorry, I didn't understand.
so I mean,
What you
like
were
the
wondering
way
if.
I see it, I'm wondering. So the way now I see the experiment, you know, like you're doing, you're answering the task, and the other person in your group is answering, and then you get to see what everybody did. But I was like, is there something where, I don't know, you can tell the other person, okay, that's, I mean, an order thing, or like if one person first gives an answer, you know, like then the other group member, like sequential thing or something where there is a kind of interactive thing going on?
Yes, for sure. I mean, you can specify this in your code, right? That you in your code specify that one person can only proceed given that another person, for example, provided an answer or so. You can just use this. You can specify this in your code. I just used this very simple code now to give you like a starting point of like what is possible.
Okay, yeah, like you integrate in the code something like if the first player with this ID gives
exactly. So like
kind
you
of
can
thing.
access these variables. I will also show you this now in the database where like these variables are stored and how they are stored. But for example, with like the get value and the set value function, you could, for example, access the value of one variable of a specific player, and then you create a conditional for all the other players that only if that one specific player has entered a certain number or so, they can enter something or they can proceed, for example.
I mean, a related question to this. I mean, imagine that you do a binary choice decision-making experiment. Can you then, you have 5 players, can you do it in such a way that people are free to make a decision whenever they want, and as soon as one person decides, everyone else sees this, or a selection of the group sees it? Or is this something that's complicated to do in Lioness? Or I mean, or you don't know. I mean, it's fine. Just get an idea.
I'm trying to think of it. Like, I mean, I haven't been in this situation. Yeah, I would say it's rather difficult to do it because like the experience that I had with Lioness when it comes to these very like timely, accurate responses, Lioness is rather slow, especially when you have to move from one stage to another. This usually takes time, and sometimes you can only access one variable if you already have moved to the next stage. So these very fast feedback experiments, I think Lioness is not maybe the best environment for.
Yeah, I mean, it's of course, it's a challenge in general to do these things online. And I mean, for every communication step you introduce, I think you also slightly increase the chances that things go wrong somewhere. And,
yeah,
you know, and that experiment breaks at some point. So of course, in that sense, simpler designs are to be preferred in this kind of environment, I think.
The thing is, I'm a bit hesitant to say I rather would say I don't know for sure. I'm a bit hesitant to say like it's impossible because my experience was like that. Relying at the beginning on these pre-programmed features, I ran quickly into like limitations when relying on these pre-programmed features. However, if you're quite versatile in coding in JavaScript, there's a lot that's possible because you can achieve like a high degree of customizability within Lioness if you can hard code the things yourself.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I arrived at the end of the experiment, and I'm going back to my control panel now, because in the control panel you can see where and how the data is stored. Basically, the database consists of 3 tables. The first table is the core table, and you can select like the variables that you want to see. By just simply clicking on them. I now just selected the plane number, the group number, subject number, the group start. Well, actually, we don't need that. The group size and the period and the page end on page variable. I think this very first table is very useful when you're running an experiment, because you can see what players are doing, or like in which period players currently are, and on which page they are. Now that I am at the end of the experiment, I'm in the 4th period and obviously at the end page. But it's very interesting, I think, and very useful to see when you run an experiment, like what's going on with players. You can see like some players maybe also get stopped, and there's people that just like quit the experiment halfway. That makes filtering also maybe easier at some point at a later stage. Then where you can use these variables then to filter. I would say the most important table is the decisions table, because this is where the responses of your participants to your text elements, as well as the variables that you recorded yourselves, are stored. So I myself entered points and correct answers at the beginning of the experiments and recorded them for in each period. And as well as the answer button, which is the answer variable, which is the text input, the number input that people gave in response to the pictures. And yeah, the global and log events I haven't really used. The variables there. One variable that's maybe still interesting, well, one variable that definitely is interesting and useful is the sessions variable, where you have the random IDs being recorded, as well as the participation amount, the bonus amount that you set at the end of the experiment, and the total earnings that you that result from the sum and the bonus amount and the participation, as well as a variable that indicates if people failed the quiz. So that's again interesting if you're running the experiment and you're checking what people are doing in the control panel. You can see if like somebody just stops after stage 3 or in the quiz. You can check if they are maybe just still in the quiz, or if they already failed the quiz and thus are not going to proceed anyways. And you can export this database to work with it and use it by going onto the menu tab in the top right, and then just click export database, and then an Excel sheet is being downloaded, and I'm just going to open this.
Oh, that function is working again.
It did not.
We did not. Yeah, we had some issues with that for a while.
So this is working. Well, for me it was working, and then yeah, you just get an Excel file, and each table is on a different sheet, and that's also then how you can access them.
So I thought that the data is saved directly online.
So the data is always saved with your experiment. So like, I mean, currently the experiment is running on a Lioness server. Currently the database is running on a Lioness server, obviously, and maybe I can actually like talk about this as well. I mean, if you want to run the experiment yourself, you will not run it via a Lioness server, but you will download the experiment and then put it up on a server of your own that you either rented or
okay, yeah. I mean, what? So do they don't let people run it on their server? Is that like it's just because it's a test experiment that it's running there?
Yeah, exactly. So like you only use the Lioness server basically to create the experiment.
Okay.
Although, I mean, so in the documentation, there's also a section where it's described how to upload the experiment onto a Google Drive server. Maybe at a later point I can also give a session on how to use the Google Cloud to do this and also, but I think like for the current framework this would have been a bit too much. And you would do this by, go to your experiment and download your experiment. And then you get a zip folder. And then basically you take the zip folder, you unpack the experiment, and then you can take the folder that is your experiment and put it onto a server. Again, like I would maybe
okay, I see. Yeah. So I because I usually use, like, I have a server with my institution, and I mean, the way you're explaining it makes sense. So then if I just download it and put it on there, it should work.
Exactly.
But I also have to then probably think to link the, like, to link that the data gets saved, the SQL database that I have that is linked to that. Something like that, right? Because maybe on the Google Drive, I have never done these things on Google Drive mostly.
Well, if you put up the server if you put the experiment onto your own server, the database comes with it. At least that's how I understand Lioness. So if you then run, if you put the experiment onto your server, basically you then enter the experiment via a control. You can enter the control panel like you have it here.
Okay,
you would then switch the test mode off, which prevents people to log in previous times. And like you can see here, you would get an URL with a link to your experiment on your server that you can then share with the participants.
Okay.
And the data is then saved also on that server that you're running the experiment on.
Okay.
So the data,
I'll check if it works.
You can always access the data then by going onto the menu tab here and export the database. Well, you have the data here, you can look at them, but you can't really work with the data looking at it in the control panel. So you can then always export the database from the server onto your device on your computer, where you then will work with it and access the data.
Okay, so based on what you're saying, it's something like they just need a server, like a host place to run the experiment, but then the database gets downloaded like this. There will be no need to probably to like link it to my SQL database, which I usually do with my experiments when I code them on like JavaScript and just like.
Yeah, no, I don't think so. I mean, I'm like not an expert in SQL either.
Of course, I know, and it might be that things are different based on which server, if the servers allow. But the idea is like this. Okay, no, thank you.
I mean, it's really a built-in function of Lioness that it actually immediately stores all the data, so you don't need to put an own data set in, or you don't need to put an own storage place for the data in the back. It's already there.
Okay.
Yeah. So
yeah, exactly. That was what I was trying to understand.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. I also recently discovered that there's a function here which is map. I think this is also a new feature, and I guess interesting when you're running the experiment, and then you can see like from where people have logged into your experiment. You also have the function of emptying the database, since like I already downloaded mine. I guess this is useful if, for example, you then use like a Google Cloud server or so, like or you want to restart a new experiment, you can just delete everything which is stored in the database, and the database is free again. Make sure if you empty the data tables, I guess you would only do this at the end of an experiment, or like when you are about to delete the experiment from the server that you had it on, that you would empty the data tables. Definitely only after you have exported the database and saved the data somewhere safe. Yes, I think this captures the most important things to get started, at least with programming an experiment on the Lioness database itself, or on the Lioness servers itself. do you have more questions at this point before I would maybe then end with like a few hints that I would have appreciated if I I would have appreciated when starting with Lioness myself?
I don't have anything at the moment.
Yeah, go on, I guess.
Yes.
Fine.
So, yeah, I mean, several things I already mentioned. I start with like stressing again to use the forum and the repository when running into a problem, because yeah, for me that was kind of an eye-opener when I found out, I think like 2 or 3 months later, that there is a forum. And I mean, I was in contact with Lucas directly, and he helped me out with some things, but then when I saw the forum, yeah, it was really really good to know, to like have this resource there. Maybe before that, obviously, getting acquainted with basic JavaScript and HTML is definitely helpful. I mean, you don't need much for very basic functionality there, but it offers a lot of customizability if you are able to code a bit more in JavaScript. The Lioness documentation also makes a reference to w3schools.com, but I mean, on the web you find multiple resources to learn basic JavaScript code or get acquainted with basic JavaScript code. Also, YouTube tutorials can be very helpful. There is a relatively high degree of customizability, as I said. What you can do with the text boxes is you can, like I did to a very basic degree, you can use them basically for your page setup, also in the sense that you use your HTML code to create objects that you can then access with your JavaScript code, and you can basically change the page setup, or like features that you want to display on the page or on the stage with HTML code that you just simply type into a text field, into a text box. I think that was also very useful to realize. Generally set timeouts.
So sorry, David, on that. So whatever stage you're on in the experiment, if you have an object that you created, you will be able to refer to it.
On that stage, yes.
So only on only on that stage, because at some point you showed us, like with the feedback, it was stage, and you could still call something that happened on the stage before.
So yes, you have a few. That's a very good point, Marva. Very good point. So maybe let me go to the feedback. So you meant that with the stage before, where I access the value on the stage before, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So exactly. So like when you want to use a variable, or when you use to like interact maybe with an object that you created in a text box as HTML code, you need to specify that variable on the very same page as well. Other than the global variables, which you have in the in the database, in the core table and in the sessions table. These ones you can access directly using like the $signs that I also used here at the very end to provide the feedback. These ones you can access directly, but if you want to use a variable that is not specified in your databases already, so like for example answer own, you have to first, if you want to like access it from a value in the database, you have to first like access it via the get value function, or in any other way. So for example, here the correct answer array or the correct answer variable, I specify just within that JavaScript code box on that same page. But like, so for example, like here I specify the array of correct answers, and then I select the correct answer for that period. If I would now move to the next page, that variable wouldn't be accessible to me anymore.
Yeah, okay, that was exactly what I meant. So then you would need to have it stored in these variables over there. I'm just thinking a bit like sometimes with complex experiments where, I don't know, you need to know what happened on the previous trial to, for just feedback for anything, for like getting to the next level, you would store this thing and then call it again on the same page.
Exactly. So what you would do then is, like, for example, you would like to basically, this is what I'm doing with the correct answer, right? I want to know if the person answered correctly or not correctly. Then I, at the very beginning of the experiment, I specify these variables that I need, that I should also be stored in the database, because then I have access to them across all stages, across all periods, once they are specified. And then I can set a value. I can set the value in each period to them by using the set value function, and I can access them at any stage by using the get value function across stages. Does this make sense?
Okay, great. Yeah, thanks.
Okay. Yeah. Yes, perfect. That was a very good point. Yeah, and yeah, personally, when it comes maybe to like some kind of interactivity or like a more dynamic display of things, there's the set timeout function and the set interval function in JavaScript, with which you can create like a set interval. You can create counters, so, or like execute codes over a certain amount of time, or the set timeout function, where you can execute code after a certain delay of time. Which makes it very useful, for example, to display image sequences. Yeah, but I think like if you start going into JavaScript code, you will have a very steep learning curve there. And maybe finally, what is useful at the end, generally when you go through your code, is to use the console in your browser to debug your code if you run into a problem. So here I had a problem that I actually didn't know why my points weren't correctly updating for one of the participants, and then I just entered like a console log in my loop, and I think I realized that I just had a typo in my variable. So so with the console log, you can display variables in the console, but also like it gives you error messages if like a certain variable is not defined or so, and like something is not happening. Usually it always helps to go here first if something is not going as the way you planned. And what I also found very useful is that when you go on the sources tab, why is this not here though? Sorry, maybe let me try another test play. Yeah, I don't know why at the end page, maybe because it's the last page and I don't have a continue button there, it ends. But when you go into the console and you go into the sources tab, and you pick the last JS library, you have there are all functions that are internal to Lioness listed as well, with the arguments, because not all of them are listed in the Lioness documentation. And I found it very useful at some point when I got a bit more into it to look up these functions, because they usually have a description on top of it, what the function does, what kind of arguments it takes, this was very helpful in accessing for like more dynamic experiments, accessing variables for like specific specific players or at specific times in specific periods, etc. So
at the end, you actually get the full code going through this.
Yes,
right?
You get all the code.
That's really nice, because you can
see. You can basically, it's a library. I think this is the library they created for Lioness, and you can see the whole library of functions that is being used in Lioness.
And so I don't know, maybe, I mean, it's more of a curiosity question, but like, is it like the way they do it to because it's really complicated to match players and stuff. Is it based on like, because I don't know if it will be in the code, but when we had, I didn't even know that Lioness existed, although I do group experiments, but never done them like this online. Like I always have to deceive the players. But I was wondering how they do it. Like, are they, how does it work, the server thing? I don't know if you know. Like,
no, unfortunately I don't know like how the exact matching procedure works. I'm also not sure like if you will find this in the code here.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's really just out of curiosity, because I feel that it's a huge challenge, and it's really nice that they did it. And what you're saying, so we could just put the link to the experiment on mturk or Prolific, and the only thing that is important is that people connect at the same time, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So like what I know about the matching procedure is that it works on like a first come first serve basis. So when people like go on Lioness and they click on the link, like for example here. So I started a new test player, and they click through, and they land in the lobby. They are being matched with the first person that after them reaches the lobby as well. And if somebody before them is already in the lobby, they will be matched with these participants. Obviously, like depending on the group size, like it always works on a first come first serve basis.
Unless, of course, you specify in certain ways, right? So you can also first classify participants and then make groups consisting of certain types of people, right? So this is the default functionality, but of course there are more complicated things possible here as well.
Yes, there is I think also one function, I haven't used it, that's also why I haven't touched up on it, which is called, I think, set role. And I think this is what Ralph mentioned, or what Ralph mentioned is that you can specify roles that specific players already take, and then based on these roles you match groups. So you will always make sure that only
so for example, you could have them answer a question, say, I'm just saying, like, I don't know, what's your age? And then the other person, a few people do it, and then based on that output, could you rematch people together, or?
I'm not sure if you can rematch them, but you can specify the matching in the first place based on certain criteria.
I guess, but this would be done mostly on mturk or Prolific, right? Like you could say, now I'm doing the experiment with people with the age blah blah, and then at least you're fine, instead of doing it on Lioness, or it works.
Well, I think what you can do on mturk itself is more like a filtering, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
that's a filtering, but the matching itself, that always happens within Lioness. Like the creation of a group of participants that are interacting with each other, that always happens within Lioness.
Okay.
Yes.
Cool. Thank you very much, David. I think it's unless they're more urgent, or do you still have other things to say or not? Because otherwise, maybe we.
No, I think I would also be at the end now.
Yeah.
I hope there was something for you to take away from it. obviously, if you have questions, you can always shoot me a message or so. Yes, maybe at a later point, I can do like a similar session where I maybe go into a bit more on how to set up a server on Google Cloud, or like how to download the experiment and use it on the local host. That's maybe the last thing that I can add, is that you have these pre-programmed features, and for example, when you use the discrete choice option, you get like these little boxes with the choice options, and they have a specific size that is predetermined by Lioness. But once you have downloaded your experiment, you can access each stage as a PHP file in itself, and you can technically still edit that after having downloaded experiments, and maybe change the layout there as well a bit. But yeah, maybe that's already a bit that's a bit more advanced. Yeah, but I would end with this. Thanks for listening, and enjoy trying out Lioness.
Cool. Thank you so much, David. It was super helpful.
Thank you very much. Yeah, it was very clear.
Yeah, thank you, David. It was pretty cool. Yeah.
All right. Well, have a nice day then, and see you soon.
Bye.
Ciao, ciao.
Bye.